What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's Daniel, and welcome back to your video. Today, I'll be taking a look at the entry list for the 2024 Go Bowling at the Glen at Watkins Glen. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into it. We're going to start talking about the one car for Trackhouse Racing. This course will be driven by Ross Chastain. Ross Chastain's had an up and down season in 2024 and still is looking for his first win of the 2024 season. Ross likely has had pretty good speed on road courses so far in the 2024 season. They will have an addition of Shane Van Gisbergen coming in to be a teammate technically. I do think that Ross Chastain will have some pretty good pace and speed this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, up with the 2 car for Team Penske. This is one going to be driven by Austin Cindric. Austin Cindric had a very major standout performance in Atlanta where he led at 92 laps and is now 27 points above the cutoff line. If he runs well enough this weekend at Watkins Glen, I can see Austin Cindric having a really strong chance, a great opportunity to advance to the next round of the playoffs, which would be a big playoff shocker, but Austin Cindric's looking for a fantastic run this weekend at Watkins Glen Speedway. Up next, up with the 3 car for Richard Childress Racing. This one's going to be driven by Austin Dillon. Now, Austin Dillon so far this year on road courses, he has not ran that great. But I feel like RCR in the last couple months especially, they found some pace and speed. And remember, Austin Dillon picked up the victory at Richmond earlier this year. I expect Austin Dillon to have some pretty good pace and speed potentially, but I do think he'll likely finish outside of top 20 more than likely for sure this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, up with the 4 car for Stewart-Haas Racing. This one's going to be driven by Josh Berry. Now, Josh Berry's been really good on short tracks in super speedways and the mile and a half as well this year. But on the road courses so far, he has completely struggled. And unfortunately, I do expect him to struggle once again at Watkins Glen. It just feels like this 14 doesn't run great at these types of tracks. Harbour struggled in those last couple years at this track, to be fair. So I'm not really expecting much from Josh Berry. I think he'll end up struggling and not having a great run, unfortunately, this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, up at the 5 car for Hendrick Motorsports. This one's going to be driven by Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson is coming off of having a not great run at Atlanta, where unfortunately he got involved in a wreck with 5 laps to go in stage number 1. Luckily for Kyle Larson, he's been pretty good at Watkins Glen, as he's won there twice in the Cup Series and once in the Xfinity Series. I expect Larson to be a major threat and contender. Hendrick has dominated. They've won every race since 2017 at the track, or 2018 I should say. I expect him to be very strong and a major threat to win this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, up with the 6 car for RFK Racing. This one's going to be driven by Brad Keselowski. Brad Keselowski used to be really great at this racetrack, but he has not been great on road course in the last 4 or 5 years. But I feel like with this being a tire management race, Keselowski could show up and run pretty well. It wouldn't surprise or shock me. He needs to get a little bit above that cutoff line. He's technically tied for the last spot at the moment right now. He'll be looking for a great run. There's also rumors of RFK Racing look to expand with Ryan Preece maybe going over there. We could see them for sure expand next season as well. Up next on the 7 car for Spire Motorsports. This one's going to be driven by Corey LaJoie. While Corey LaJoie hasn't had the finish to show for, he's been qualifying pretty surprisingly well at road courses this season. So I do think LaJoie could qualify inside the top 10, but as for the race, that'll be to determine. And I'm not really expecting Corey to be a major threat and contender. Is he still looking for a job going to 2025? He'll be looking for a good run this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, up at the 8 car for Richard Childress Racing. This one's going to be driven by Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch has a lot of momentum right now. He has had 4 straight top 10 finishes in a row. He's been leading laps in pretty much every race in the last 4 weeks. And Kyle Busch, I feel like of how fast he's been on road courses, I can see him potentially getting his first win of the season here. I think he's going to have a really fast car. I think he will be a threat and contender for the victory. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised or shocked if Kyle Busch picks up the win this weekend at Watkins Glen with RCR. Up next, up with the 9 car for Hendrick Motorsports. This one's going to be driven by Chase Elliott. Chase Elliott has been really good at Watkins Glen historically. He almost won this race in 2021, almost won in 2022, and of course, unfortunately, had fuel issues in 23, but in 2019 and 2018, he went to victory lane here. I think if there's a track that Chase could get a second win of the year, it's definitely this weekend at Watkins Glen. He's looking for his 20th career NASCAR Cup Series win, which I think would put him 44th or 45th on the all-time wins list. I think Chase will be a major threat and contender to win this weekend at the Glen. Up next, up at the 10 car for Stewart-Haas Racing. This one's going to be driven by Noah Gragson. Noah Gragson's been impressive at times so far in 2024. However, Noah Gragson has not been great at road courses at all this year. And unfortunately, I do think Noah Gragson is sadly not going to run well, and I think he will unfortunately end up struggling this weekend at Watkins Glen. I don't think he runs very well. I think the 10 team most likely will end up struggling, unfortunately, this weekend at the Glen. Up next on the 11 car for Joe Gibbs Racing. This one's going to be driven by Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin did not have a good run at Atlanta Motor Speedway as he ran outside the top 30 pretty much all day long. And he's also been involved with a lot of charter stuff that's been going on in recent weeks along with his team and organization, of course not signing the charter agreement. If he's looking to turn it around, I don't think it's going to happen this weekend. He's not had the finishes at road courses, but we'll see what Denny Hamlin can do this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next up with the 12th car for Team Penske. This one's going to be driven by Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney is coming into Watkins Glen with the biggest points gap over the cutoff line, being 45 points above. He just needs to survive this weekend at the Glen in Bristol, and Ryan Blaney will be very good to go. He's actually had some good runs on road courses this year, so I could see him getting a top 10. There's a really good shot and possibility that Ryan Blaney could potentially advance into the next round with a great run this weekend at Watkins Glen with Team Penske. Up next up with the 13 car for Kaulig Racing. Yes, Kaulig Racing is going to enter a third car for this weekend at the Glen with AJ Allmendinger with Gold Bowling as the sponsor. AJ, I think, could be a major threat for the win. He's been historically really good at Watkins Glen. He almost won here in 2022, had a really good car to win in 2023, and I think he has a really good chance to get his first win of the season. I expect him to be up front, and I do think he will be a contender for the win at Watkins Glen. Up next up with the 14 car for Stewart-Haas Racing. This one's going to be driven by Chase Briscoe. Chase Briscoe is coming in with desperately needing to have a very, very good run as he's currently the lowest of drivers below the cutoff line, being 25 points back. He is going to need to have a great run, and historically he's been hit or miss on road courses in the NASCAR Cup Series. But I do think if they can bring the pace and speed like they had at Darlington, I could see Chase Briscoe getting a very strong and great performance this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, up with the 15 car for Rick Ware Racing. This will be once again be driven by Kaz Grala, who will make his first start in a couple of weeks. Kaz Grala is a really underrated super speedway racer. He's been really good on these types of tracks. In his first Cup start with RCR, he did lead at the Daytona Road Course and finish in 8th. I could see him maybe getting a top 20. It wouldn't surprise or shock me. I think Rick Ware is going to bring the pace and speed to try to run up front, and I could see Kaz having a pretty solid run this weekend at the Glen. Up next up with the 16 car for Kaulig Racing. This one's going to be driven by Shane Van Gisbergen, who will make his third consecutive start in a row. Shane is going to be a major threat to win this weekend. He's been really good at road courses in the Xfinity Series, but has also been pretty fast on road courses in Cup as well, as he could have won Chicago had it not been for getting crashed by Chase Briscoe. I do expect SVG to be a major threat and contender, and it wouldn't surprise or shock me if he sweeps this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next up with the 17 car for RFK Racing. This one's going to be driven by Chris Buescher. Chris Buescher has always found a way to finish up front in these races. While he's never won a road course race in the NASCAR Cup Series, I do think he could run pretty well. He's been the better of the two RFK drivers at this racetrack, and I certainly do think he'll have some pace and speed going into the weekend. I expect Chris to have a very solid performance, and I wouldn't be surprised if Chris potentially gets his first win of 2024 this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next up with the 19 car for Joe Gibbs Racing. This one's going to be driven by Martin Truex Jr. Martin Truex Jr. is desperately needing a good run. He is over 10 points below the cutoff line currently at the moment, and he doesn't have any momentum as he has not scored a top 5 finish since Kansas in the spring, which is like race 11 or 12 of the season. He desperately needs a good run and needs to run great, and I'm not really sure if the 19 team has a ton of momentum unfortunately, at this particular moment. Up next up with the 20 car for Joe Gibbs Racing. This one's going to be driven by Christopher Bell. Unlike Martin Truex Jr., Christopher Bell has a lot of momentum, and he's been pretty solid on road courses so far in 2024. While he hasn't won a road course race this season, I do think he will be a threat to win this weekend at the Glen with how fast he's been. He's been the strongest Joe Gibbs Racing driver, in my opinion, so far this year, and I do think that he'll have a solid chance and opportunity for a really strong run and great weekend this weekend at Watkins Glen with the 20 team. Up next, how about the 21 car for the Wood Brothers? This will once again be driven by Harrison Burton. Harrison Burton is lucky to make the playoffs this year, and I do expect that he is going to struggle. While it's really cool to see him make the playoffs based off the win, I don't think Harrison is going to be a threat for the win or the victory. I think he will struggle, unfortunately, this weekend, finishing most likely outside the top 30, which Matt Benedetto is trying to wheel this car at this point. I think Harrison will, unfortunately, not have a good run this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, how about the 22 car for Team Penske? This will once again be driven by Joey Logano. Joey Logano, of course, is now locked into the round of 12 with the win at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and he's going to need to be thankful for that because he has not been great at Watkins Glen in recent years. But to be fair, he's had some decent finishes on road courses, but not great finishes. I think Logano could get maybe a top 15 or top 20, but I don't expect him to set the world on fire. He's thinking his lucky stars that he got the win at Atlanta a couple days ago. Up next, how about the 23 car for 2311 Racing? This will once again be driven by Bubba Wallace. Now, Bubba Wallace's future is a little uncertain currently at the moment, as unfortunately 2311 Racing did not agree to the charter settlement, meaning Bubba at the moment is a free agent, but we do expect that he will sign a contract extension with 2311 Racing once they do eventually sign the charter agreement in the future. Bubba, though, has been good on road course in recent years, and maybe that can distract them from what's been going on with charters in recent weeks. Up next, how about the 24 car for Hendrick Motorsports? This will once again be driven by William Byron. Now, William Byron won a Circuit Americas earlier this year and did have a pretty solid run at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And it wouldn't surprise or shock me if he goes back-to-back this time around. I do think he's going to have a chance and opportunity. Of course, historically, he had Chase win twice in a row, then Larson win twice in a row. Maybe historical context means Byron gets 2 wins in a row at this track. We'll see what William Byron can do this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, how about the 31 car for Colleague Racing? This will once again be driven by Daniel Hemrick. Daniel Hemrick's had some pretty solid runs at times so far in 2024, but for the most part this year, it's been a little bit of a struggle for the 31 team. His future is also a little uncertain currently at the moment for 2025. He may not even be in the Cup Series or NASCAR at all at this point. He'll be looking for a very solid and good run to try to convince people that he still belongs in NASCAR after the 2024 season. Up next, how about the 34 car for Front Row Motorsports? This will once again be driven by Michael McDowell. Michael McDowell did get a runner-up finish earlier this year at Sonoma and had a really strong car in the race last year before unfortunately having an engine issue. I think Michael McDowell could be a threat to win this weekend. He hasn't won so far this year, but he's a very good road course racer. I expect this number 34 team to have the pace and speed to potentially contend for their first win of 2024 this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, how about the 38 car for Front Row Motorsports? This will once again be driven by Todd Gillen. Todd Gillen has been very impressive throughout the 2024 season, as for a lot of the year, he's been inside the top 20 in the standings. Now, I don't expect him to set the world on fire. He'll probably have a good run this weekend, but not a great run. I think he has a good chance for some solid points. He'll be looking to pick up some stage points and looking to get some really solid points after this weekend at Watkins Glen with the 38 team. Up next, how about the 41 car for Stewart-Haas Racing? This will once again be driven by Ryan Preece. Now, Ryan Preece is a little distracted at the moment, as he is, of course, expected to go over to RFK Racing to drive a third RFK Racing car next year. But in the meantime, Ryan Preece has not been that great on road courses, and I do think he sadly will end up struggling this weekend. I do think all of SHR, maybe outside of Chase Briscoe, is not going to run well. We'll see what Ryan Preece can do this weekend, though, at Watkins Glen with the 41 team. Up next, how about the 42 car for Legacy Motor Club? This will once again be driven by John Hunter Nemechek. Now, John Nemechek is very interesting. He had a really good run going with Legacy at Chicago, and to be fair, he's been pretty good at road courses in the lower series. My worry is Legacy speed at times this year. They can either run up front or they're not major contenders. I think John Hunter could have a good run, but I'm not exactly sure what he is going to do for sure this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, how about the 43 car for Legacy Motor Club? This will once again be driven by Eric Jones. Now, unlike John Hunter, Eric Jones has struggled on road courses so far in 2024. He hasn't just had the pace or speed, unfortunately. He doesn't run up front consistently enough, and I feel like this 43 team just has been way too inconsistent throughout the 2024 season. Maybe it'll prove me wrong and run great, but like I said, I'm not expecting Eric Jones to be a major threat and contender for the win this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, up with the 45 car for 2311 Racing. This one once again be driven by Tyler Reddick. Tyler Reddick is coming off a pretty solid run at Atlanta Motor Speedway and continues to be very impressive at the end of this regular season or at the start of these playoffs. He's been really good at road courses, so I do expect Tyler Reddick to be a major threat and contender to get his third win of the season and what will be, I believe, his 9th career or 8th career NASCAR Cup Series victory. His future is kind of uncertain with the situation with the charters, but I don't think he's going anywhere. I think Reddick is safe, and I think he'll be looking to get his third win of 2024 this weekend. Up next, up with the 47 car for JTG Doherty Racing. This will once again be driven by Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I expect Stenhouse to struggle. He has never ran great at road courses throughout his NASCAR career, and I feel like the 47 team are kind of checked out at the moment as they're trying to prepare for what they're going to be doing in 2025. Ricky's looking for a great run, but again, I don't expect it that much. I know he got a top 10 in Chicago, but that's because a lot of the major threats fell out of the race. I do think that Ricky Stenhouse Jr. will struggle this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, up with the 48 car for Hendrick Motorsports. This will once again be driven by Alex Bowman. There's been a lot of rumors about Alex Bowman's future in recent weeks, but Bowman kind of shut a lot of people up with a great run at Atlanta, having the best average running position throughout the whole entire day. I think Alex Bowman deserves to be in the 48 car, and I think he could run pretty well. He's had some good runs at road courses so far this year, and I do think Alex Bowman could have a strong chance and a strong possibility of maybe getting potentially a top 5 this weekend at Watkins Glen with the 48 team. Up next, up at the 50 car for 2311 Racing. Yes, 2311 Racing is going to be bringing back the 50 car for the third and final time of the season, and Wapama Montoya will make his first NASCAR Cup start since 2014 at the Brickyard 400. Juan Montoya, a former winner in the NASCAR Cup Series here back in 2010, he is going to be a threat to win in my opinion. I know it's been a long time since he's been behind the wheel of a NASCAR Cup Series car, but I think the next gen is going to suit him very well, and with the speed that 2311 Racing has shown, I think he will be a threat to get it done. Maybe we'll see Carlos Kerbish behind the wheel in the future, but I'm glad to see Juan Montoya back. I think he will be a threat to win this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, how about the 51 car for Rick Ware Racing? This will once again be driven by Justin Haley. Justin Haley at times this year has been super impressive, and then there's times where he just hasn't ran as great. I do think they're going to struggle a little bit, though I will say he was pretty impressive at COTA where he had a top 20 performance, and I do feel like at times he's been pretty good. I think he could have a solid run. He's been good at road courses in the past. We'll see what he can do, and we'll see if he can bring that number 51 car up to the front. He's looking for a solid and a pretty strong and great run with Rick Ware Racing this weekend at Watkins Glen with the 51 team. Up next, how about the 54 car for Joe Gibbs Racing? This will once again be driven by Ty Gibbs. Ty Gibbs is coming into this race being 0 points above the cutoff line. Luckily for Ty Gibbs, he is going to be a threat to win at the Glen. He's won there in Xfinity before, and Ty Gibbs is going to have a strong chance and opportunity to win. This 54 car has been really great at road courses and was also pretty good at Bristol Motor Speedway earlier this year as well. So I do expect the 54 team to show up with a lot of pace and a lot of great speed, and I do think he'll be a major threat and contender to potentially get his first career NASCAR Cup Series win with Joe Gibbs Racing at Watkins Glen. Up next, up with the 71 car for Spire Motorsports. This will once again be driven by Zane Smith. Zane Smith is desperately trying to have a fantastic run and end the year on a really high note, considering his future is still very uncertain in the Cup Series currently at the moment. But I think if anyone can run well, it is Zane Smith. Zane is someone that sometimes can get the best out of equipment and show up unexpectedly and just run very quick. So I think Zane will have the pace and speed for sure to contend, and I think he could have a really strong and great run, maybe like a top 15 or top 20 first standards this weekend at Watkins Glen. Up next, up with the 77 car for Spire Motorsports. This will once again be driven by Carson Hocevar. Now, I believe Carson Hocevar, if I'm not mistaken, drove in this car last year. No, Michael Rockefeller was behind the wheel, I believe, but Carson Hocevar has been pretty underrated at road courses this year so far. I do expect with the speed the Spire has shown in the past at road courses, I do think Carson could have a very solid performance. It would not surprise me or not shock me if Carson Hocevar somehow gets a top 20, literally even the top 15 or top 10 this weekend at Watkins Glen. And finally, let's talk about the 99 car for Trackhouse Racing. This, of course, will be driven by Daniel Suarez. Now, Daniel Suarez is coming off of having a super impressive run at Atlanta, finishing second and now being 22 points above the cutoff line. Now, last year in this race, he did unfortunately struggle a little bit and unfortunately ended up crashing and getting some damage. But I feel like Suarez is going to learn from those mistakes this time around, and I think he actually will have some good pace and speed in the race. I feel like Trackhouse showing up a little more, and I do think Swartz could have a good performance. So we'll see what ends up doing, and we'll see if Daniel Swartz can run fast this weekend at Watkins Glen. So that is going to be it for the interest video for the 2024 Go Bowling at the Glen at Watkins Glen. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, does go live on my channel. Finally, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Link description below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's video. What are your thoughts about the interest? Let me know it in the comments below. We got some great content dropping later this week. Tomorrow we're going to have a NASCAR news video discussing this over the course of the last couple of days. We're probably going to have a silly season update dropping either Thursday or Friday, potentially talking about drivers like Haley Deegan, SVG, you name it. Some other guys in the field as well, like Alex Bowman, among others. We're going to have race picks on Thursday for Cup. Wednesday, we're going to have race picks for the Xfinity Series. And in general, we got a lot of great content dropping as we go to Watkins Glen for the second race of the round of 16. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.